Now is it good? Okay, I am starting my timer. So this is a 15-minute talk. We'll see. We're in it together. All right, hi everybody. Welcome to Sunglasses in the Club, designing games for light sensitivity. I'm Shell Little. So a little bit about me. You can find me on Blue Sky. That's where I'm at now. I'm an independent senior accessibility specialist and inclusive design consultant and disabled speaker. So I talk on all kinds of subjects. Game accessibility is one of them. And I live in Seattle. I'm partnered and all my kids have tails. So due to my neurodivergence and a TBI, I'm incredibly sensitive to light. And it sounds really simple, like light bad, and that's it. But when anybody here who has light sensitivity knows it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot of factors and a lot of different things that can be talked about. So it's not just simple like light bad. So let's start off by defining photophobia and photosensitivity. So photophobia and photosensitivity are terms that are used interchangeably to describe an abnormal or extreme sensitivity to light. So, but when we talk about light sensitivity in games, we often only get to as it applies to seizures, which is an incredibly important conversation to have. We need to be thinking about how game design will affect people who do have seizures. But if that's where we stop when it comes to light sensitivity, we're missing out on a lot of people. So on the screen right now, I have a tweet that says, I wish more games had the option to disable flashes for people with light sensitivity. To play a game, I have to risk seizures or not play at all. And that's the reality for a lot of people, unfortunately. So when we think of light sensitivity through the lens of seizures, we're constantly thinking of things like muzzle flashes for flashing, strobing, club lights, and flickering for think horror lights. On the screen right now, I have an image from Disney Dreamlight where there's a lightning storm that a lot of people have reported issues with. So we should not set the bar to just don't kill someone. Like that's the bar that a lot of people, they're like, oh, how many flashes? Oh, 3 per second. Let's do 2 per second. As long as we don't kill someone, we're good. So on the scale of enough high contrast to trigger a seizure and no high contrast, they're just going just a little bit past, which, not only is this a disservice to your players with epilepsy, because epilepsy is a wide range, but it also leaves out a large group of players who are light sensitive. So when we think about that scale, again, on the screen, I have a scale, and in the middle, that section is where people who are affected by light sensitivity will be missed out. So players with light sensitivity include sensory processing disorder, so autism, ADHD, people who are just neurodivergent, photosensitive migraines, so people who have brain injuries, eye conditions, or chronic migraines. And also, in my research, I found mental health disabilities as well. So people with anxiety, PTSD, and depression are also more likely to have light sensitivity. And then obviously, we do have people who have seizures as well on this list. But interestingly enough, a common symptom of long COVID is light sensitivity. So according to the American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, long COVID is going to add 22 million individuals to the US disabled population. So thinking about that in terms of numbers, people who have never been disabled, never experienced disability, they now are. It's like, welcome to the club, guys. So when we're thinking about light sensitivity, that's a very large user group. All right, cool. So let's get into some examples. So I did a lot of research for this talk, trying to find trends in what people were experiencing as issues and just kind of common themes. And I found 3 kind of common themes that showed up a lot. And these themes are things that are oftentimes missed, even when we're thinking about, light sensitivity in terms of epilepsy. Some themes kind of came up. So the 3 problem areas that I found were small animations, and it's like small animations, bright UI, and bright or blue environments. So let's talk about small animations, and small is in quotes. But so when we're talking about, photosensitivity and standards, the ZAG rule of 118 has a couple standards, but the ones that apply for this are you're watching out for the change in contrast between flash color and background color being greater than 10%. And the size of the flash on the screen is larger than 20%. So we think about like a lightning flash, for example, that makes perfect sense. But what about small animations that can become large during gameplay? So an example on the screen right now is Tears of the Kingdom. So when you are rock breaking, there is a very bright flash animation. And when you're in the third person camera, it's pretty far away. But when you are in, say, example, like a cave and the rocks are in every direction around you, that flash now takes up 40, 50, 60% of the screen. I was triggered by this personally, and it gave me a migraine. But, we don't think about the flash when a player is really, really close up. And by doing so, not only are you harming users who have light sensitivity, but it's also can become a risk for those who have seizures. Another example is in Slime Rancher. So in the range exchange, so basically you are gathering up your material, they're called plorts, and you're inserting them into basically the store. And when you're depositing the plorts, there's a little animation. But if you get too close, that animation continues to grow on the screen. And if you are rapidly putting in, say, like 100, that animation lasts for a really long time and takes up a really large portion of the screen. So in this kind of regard, a lot of the asks users had been saying from my research, they were saying, let's just turn these animations off. If a user wants to turn it off, let them turn it off. And that's the beautiful thing about context cues. There's multiple ways you can know you're hitting a rock without having a flash animation. There's the sound effects. There's the fact that the rock is gone. There's all different ways you can animate or communicate that information to a user without having these animations on. And the second option was to have them scale smaller as that animation gets closer to the screen. Another great example is rockets in Minecraft. If you're looking straight up and you fire rockets, the flash animation can get quite large on the screen as well. So allow users just to turn those animations off potentially. Awesome. Next up is bright UI. So when we're back to the ZAG rule, the basic rules for photosensitive epilepsy, the 2 bullet points, they're redundant. They're the same from previous, but they both apply to where the change in contrast or the flash color is greater than 10% and the size is greater than 20%. So we think about those things, but what we don't think about sometimes is what about full screen or large menus that take up 50% of the screen or more? So I have a tweet on the screen from Hannah Ruthbird, who says, please God, normalize discussions over flashing lights in games. If you're a dev or PR, get an accessibility consultant in as standard. So even a 1-second flash is enough to trigger a migraine. Sifu menu screen took me out for 2 days. So Sifu is a fighting game where the menus were very, very bright. So when opening that menu, the contrast created a white flash across the whole screen. So, players would open the menu and close the menu, and that unfortunately creates a flashing sensation and caused that player to have a 2-day-long migraine. Now, thankfully, Sifu came back and they already patched it. They gave users a dark mode setting, which is great. They listened to their users. They had an accessibility consultant in there, and they did a great job. So they allowed users to have a dark mode for the UI, which fixed the problem. So, but games like Sim 4, for example, I have a tweet on the screen of a user that says, so one of the mods I need to be able to play Sims 4 without having a migraine triggered, it says it replaces the UI to make it not so bright, is broken and the update. And this player says, I can't play until the mod updates. So on the right-hand side of the screen, I just have the bright menu. So this player has to go so far as to mod the game to be able to avoid any bright light triggers because the menu is big, it comes up instantaneous, and it's very, very white. I have a tweet on the screen that says, I love city builders, and this one has me interested. But I have an important question. Will there be a dark mode of sorts for accessibility? I can be set off by very bright / almost white things, which can cause migraines and vertigo. It sucks to say that your game would cause that. So players are asking before games are coming out for these options. These are things players are looking for because they want to buy and play these games. So the recommendations that I found through my research were let players customize their UI. So, it's really hard because with seizures, people who have epilepsy, red can be a big trigger, but on the other side, people who have light sensitivity, blue can be a really big trigger. So allow users to pick what their UI is. And also having a dark mode options. Everybody should always have dark mode, but having a dark mode options for bright UIs is a great option as well. And finally, our last section, bright or blue environments. So like I was saying before, bright lights can be a trigger, but blue lights, they're typically the most painful hue for people who are light sensitive, myself included. I use blue light filters on all of my devices because of my brain injury. So It's also the color that is most commonly emitted by screens on our computers, our smartphones. So blue light for me, like especially I know sometimes now parking lots will have the blue light flashing machines. Those are, oh my gosh, those are the worst for me. So blue light can be a really big problem for a lot of players. So when we're back to the basic rules of ZAG, so the change in contrast being 10, the size 20%, but a flash can occur at a lower frequency, but over extended periods of time. And when we don't think about necessarily is like, what about bright or blue environments, especially when the UI is dark? So then you're creating contrast that way as well. So an example that I saw a lot when I was researching was the WoW expansion Shadowlands and the Bastion. It is an incredible, it's supposed to be kind of like a Greek god, very, ethereal, but it is very, very blue and very, very bright. And there were a lot of players who were saying they were struggling through this expansion because they could not handle being in this area. So the Bastion, and it actually got to the point where players were using the Inky Black potion, which is a short-term item that can apply to them. That basically it's like a sunglasses effect. So the players were going, the players were going out of their way to create an object, buy an object in order to make this more accessible for themselves, which is like, why is that not just a setting? But so players were trying to find ways around that because they still really wanted to enjoy the expansion. And continuing on the Shadowlands expansion, the flight path. So to get from one area to the next, players were put onto a worm type creature and flown from point A to point B. And a lot of people were struggling with how blue the environment was and how bright the flight path was. So a lot of people were saying they had to walk away from their computer while this was playing because it was so painful for them to be on there. And plus the animation of the flight path was causing people to have vertigo and nausea as well, which obviously not a W there either. So yeah, I saw a lot about Shadowlands. I was like, oh no. I have a tweet on the screen. This is about Final Fantasy. As someone with light sensitivity, the game can be challenging at times as I need to keep it dim at times, but then I can't see what's happening. So I'm constantly having to change settings and they were dreading the next expansion. So this can be a big problem. So it's like, what do you do? So players have to turn the brightness down on their devices, but then they lose the contrast and they lose the ability to potentially see what's going on. Obviously, dark environments are typically dangerous environments. So players are then stuck shifting their brightness back and forth. And if they don't get it quite right, they can get hit with that bright light, which can be a really big problem, which I did see a lot of people saying when it comes to the brightness shifting, if they had to guess when brightness was going to happen. And a lot of times they would get it wrong. So the suggestions were let players have a rich contrast setting. So they were saying, I don't want a single slider that says dark light. I want contrast settings and gamma. I want things that can make the game work for me because ability is a sliding scale and how you're feeling one day will not be the same the next. So what a player needs is going to change. So allow them to have rich contrast settings, as well as giving users the ability to change color settings when possible. So for example, a lot of people were saying they tried to find mods in Shadowlands to take away the blue color and make it more red. A lot of them were using filters on top of the game. But unfortunately, when we think about things like Nintendo Switch and portable games, you lose the ability to put that software on top of the game. So in conclusion, 1, light sensitivity is about more than just lights and strobing. It can also be small animations. It can be more than that. So when we're talking about light sensitivity, let's go beyond just what's going on for people who have epilepsy. Again, very important conversation, but there's more conversation to be had after. And 2, when it comes to light sensitivity, basically all the suggestions were just give players the ability to choose what works for them whenever possible. So a lot of players were just asking for flexibility and freedom to pick what they wanted. It was a consistent theme through all the feedback I read through. And finally, listen to, hire, and pay disabled gamers to help make your games more accessible. And I think everybody in this room understands that. But together we can make games really accessible. So that's my talk, but if you're interested in more from me, you can visit my website, Shell E. Little. I'm currently producing on-demand classes and lectures, one-on-one mentorship, and private speaking engagements. It's kind of all I'm up to right now. So, but yeah, in terms of resources, some people had asked for resources, and I just had some suggestions on the deck that will be available after. But yeah, thanks so much.